sponsors. First and foremost, Book Bump. We're so grateful to have been selected to actually have our event here. This is an amazing space. I think it's quite different from anywhere else we could have held this event, and so we're really appreciative for all of their support, including support with photography. So Moses from Global Audio is there helping us with even the sound system. We have Circle and Square Productions who are helping with video and photos. Spez who will be feeding us during tea and lunch. And we have other sponsors listed here at the bottom. So a big thank you to everyone who helped to make this event possible. So in many conferences in Canada and increasingly in the US, acknowledging the land on which the event is taking place is becoming kind of a new norm, if you will, and a way to insert awareness about Indigenous presence and recognize the history of colonialism and the need for change in settler colonial societies. And so as we were planning this event, sorry, let me just get this going. As we were planning our event, we started discussing what it would mean to do a land acknowledgement, because I don't know about you all, but I've never heard a land acknowledgement done in Kenya. But especially given this space that we're in, we thought that it was really important to think about what it means to be in this particular location. So while I hope that being in this space, I mean, it's impressive chandeliers and its high ceilings and all of these very old books leaves this kind of physical impression on us. I also want us not to just be nostalgic about the past and not just romanticize, which sometimes happens when we're in these kinds of old spaces. Because contrary to many of the lore about how Nairobi was just wilderness and a no man's land before the British, this place didn't start to exist when the British arrived, right, and began to develop their base. There were other people, other uses, and other stewards for this land. So as much as we must remember Macmillan, in whose memory this library was erected, there are others who were on this land long before the library was ever standing that we should also remember when we are all sitting here and when we acknowledge this land. So I tasked and I asked Siokao and Trevas Matapia, who you've probably seen running around, he's been a huge help in putting this event together, if we could find out a little bit more about who exactly we could acknowledge in a land acknowledgement. Who in fact managed this land before Macmillan's wife decided to build this library in his memory in the early 1900s. Unfortunately, we couldn't dig up direct records describing what was here pre-1900, but we did find at the Kenya National Archives some brief mention of nomadic Maasai. But again, these records were written by the British themselves. So as much as today, we might end up focusing on the records, documents, and archives that are sitting in this space with us, I also want us to remember the records that are not here. The oral histories about the place of the cold water, the uses and stories about this land that we might never know. We don't have a photo of what was here before the library, because who owned cameras and what photos were they interested in taking? So let's pay attention not only to what is not documented and captured, as we also think about what we want to archive and save for the future. Next slide, please. So just briefly, and the times are a bit off now, everything is pushed by about 30 minutes, but this is the kind of setup for the day. So we really wanted this to be very interactive, and so we actually asked the panelists to not necessarily present long presentations, because we want to keep it very question and answer. So I hope all of you in the audience also feel very, a lot of agency to also speak up. As Siokao was mentioning, bathrooms, just housekeeping, you'll go outside, and they're outside, located in the back here. And tea and lunch will be in this kids' corner in the side, and we also have a gallery exhibit that we've put up there, so you can view some of the different spaces that house research data in Nairobi. For those of you, I hope most have gotten their their name badges. You may or may not have a star on your name badge. If you have a star, then you're in the first lunch group. So we're splitting the lunch into two. So the first lunch will begin at 12, and the people with the star will be the ones who will go for lunch first, and then the others will go for the tour of the library. So the rest of you will be able to go, we're going to go show you up in the reading room and a lot of the other collections here. And then we'll switch. So then the other group will begin at 12:30 and go for the tour, those who have eaten, and then the rest will come down for lunch. Just to note, at registration, you completed a consent form. So we are recording, thank you Daisy. We're recording this because many people wanted to attend and they're not able to attend. And so for those who are wearing a red name badge, they requested that their image not be captured. So also those of you who are doing maybe some social media posts, if you end up taking a picture with someone with a red name badge, please crop them out. And you're welcome to share everyone who has a blue name badge. This is one way to think about consent and personal identities. And so if you also don't want to be captured on video, but you have a question or a remark, you can just write it down and hand it to some of the ushers. I think we have ushers who will be coming in and helping us during Q&A sessions. So you can just have them read it. For social media folks, we're using the Twitter hashtag ResearchKE. And finally, everyone has, I believe, a one-pager that you should have received at registration. So we really invite you to kind of jot down your thoughts throughout the day based on the conversation, the tour, all your interactions, because we see this as a way for you to actually help us analyze what's going on and to feed your thoughts back into next steps as well. So we'll be collecting these as you leave and digitizing them and uploading them as part of the notes. And so if you don't want yours to be shared, just write it at the top and we won't digitize it. But otherwise, we really would invite you to help keep this going beyond this. All right, next slide, please. So before we jump into the first panel, Leo and I want to set the stage in terms of why we felt this event was important and what we're hoping to achieve today. And I'll just start by some background on the political economy of academic publishing to really make the case for why we today need to be concerned and turn our attention to research infrastructure, especially as a place that I would call heavily saturated with research. The stakes are high in Nairobi for us to take care of our research at different levels. So I'll talk a little bit more about the work I've been doing on research data, and then I'll turn it over to Leo to close us out and talk more about open data specifically in Kenya and what we're hoping to achieve today. Next slide. When you participate in so many researches and you don't know what is happening as a result, and it's not changing the environment that we're in, you feel wasted. You keep on asking questions, but this data will go where? The one who takes data will never come back to us like, okay, we took this and these are the results. So you feel wasted. A Kibera resident explained to me. Despite decades of research aiming to solve Africa's problems and billions of dollars in funding, many of those who are studying see little change in their everyday lives. Particular communities, including the Nairobi tech sector where I worked for 5 years, and Kibera, its infamous neighboring informal settlement, appear to be increasingly over-researched, demonstrating survey fatigue, falsified responses, and even feelings of exploitation. Next slide. During 4 years managing research as part of the iHub Nairobi, the community increasingly felt burdened by the gaze of researchers and journalists. Everyone asked similar questions, and we grew tired of giving the same responses, because an economist has a different perspective and set of questions than a political scientist, I was told, when I questioned why a researcher couldn't just use the same outputs that someone else had already produced about us. As an academic, I understand that logic, but as a research participant, the questions they asked didn't feel different to me, and after taking more than 2 hours of my day with a master's student from Europe, I explicitly asked him to please share the transcript from this interview so that I could send it along to future research requests that I knew I would get. I never received the transcript, and I never heard back about any findings or any research outputs at all. So, and this was not a one-off case, this happened many times. So as the iHub research team and I increasingly began to articulate these feelings of being over-researched, we also became hyper-aware about our own research practices. How were we engaging with those we studied? Did we also go back and build community with them, or were we just one-and-done researchers? So through such self-reflection, I began to recognize this was much more complex than just a matter of being a foreign or a local researcher, because we were based in Kilimani, we were just here, and we were Nairobi-based. And I was the only Muslim group. I became interested in how funding incentives and timelines of research structured the work that we were able to do and the types of engagements we were able to have with research participants. Next slide. So this gives some of the background in terms of how I became interested in studying research itself, and also how we might make research more accountable to those who are studied. Since I know we come from different backgrounds, I just want to briefly cover some of the terms that I think will come up today. So for those who have not heard about it, open access is a mechanism by which research outputs are distributed online, free of cost and other access barriers. Open data, in a similar vein, is a term to describe the idea that some data should be freely available to everyone to use and republish as they wish, without restrictions from copyright and other mechanisms of control. So what do you think of when I say data? Metrics, ones and zeros, numbers, statistics. So I think often this is our perception when we talk about data. But as a qualitative researcher, I define data much more broadly, to also include textual data like transcripts, written documents, multimedia like photos and video, and material artifacts like found physical objects. So the open data movement in Kenya that Leo will tell us a bit more about has often focused on government data sets and numerical statistical data sets, but today we've brought together those working in research very broadly, not just computer scientists, not just statisticians, because we believe that we also need to be thinking about the unique considerations of open research data, especially qualitative data, which is often missing from these kind of open data discussions. The term open science, just to put that out there, describes this broader umbrella under which open data and open access all fit under. Next slide. So since our time at iHub Research, Leo and I became involved in different open movements. Leo was part of studying the open data movement since the early 2010, and I have been involved with the open science discussions. And through that work, came across this map, which illustrates the high imbalance in regional representation in published academic work. And this is published work in the Web of Science. So it's an imperfect map. It doesn't cover all knowledges and all works produced, but it does give us a sense of how certain existing academic publishing processes really privilege certain regions and types of knowledge, clearly, isn't it? So could open science, that is methods, tools, technologies to kind of increase public access and participation in science, address some of these inequalities about whose knowledge is valued, or conversely, might it actually exacerbate these already existing inequalities and gaps? Next slide. So the map seems to echo what Benin philosopher Pauline Hontonji has written about for decades, that too often research on the continent investigates subjects which are of interest first and foremost to a Western audience. Many of the articles are published in journals located outside of the African continent, which are therefore meant for non-African readers. He termed this extroverted scientific activity, designed to meet the theoretical needs and questions of the Western academy and not the society within which the science is being conducted. And I think this echoes a lot with what the opening statements were kind of indicating. Luckily, on our first panel, we actually have someone from Strathmore University Press, and I think it's very important to think about local publishers. Who are our local publishers, and how is the work that we are creating here actually circulating locally? I've also put Ngugi's seminal work here and Linda Tujibai-Smith's work on decolonizing methodologies, because I think these are also important works that speak to what it means to decolonize knowledge practices. And this work continues to be relevant. It's from the 1990s, given recent current events in scholarly publishing. Next slide. So over the last few years, big academic publishers, corporate publishers like Elsevier, have been acquiring various companies across the research lifecycle. So as publishers move towards open access, what I talked about open access, they've been kind of trying to continue to figure out how they can continue to maintain their profits, and redirecting business strategy towards the acquisition of not just publishing, but actually the whole infrastructure. So when I say infrastructure, I mean the tools and services that underpin kind of our end-to-end research lifecycle. So this image here in the gray, I think you can see the gray, shows the traditional publisher's role. So usually it comes in about submission. Once you've finished your project, maybe write something up and you submit it to a journal. And then it goes through peer review, and eventually will go out and be distributed. And let me say, most, especially corporate publishers, make a huge profit because a lot of the labor involved here, like peer review, is done for free by other researchers. So in fact, they've estimated, I think Elsevier's profits are above Apple's, above Google's at some point. So it really is a big money-making machine. Next slide. So this second diagram by my colleagues shows the vertical integration resulting from Elsevier's recent acquisitions over the last five years or so. So all of these are logos of companies and also new services that Elsevier has recently acquired. And it shows that from end to end now, basically they're extending their influence and ownership throughout the whole process. So this includes, right, funding, it includes, I mean, many of you maybe have used Mendeley, it includes using, you know, software management systems, it includes the networking systems. It really covers everything now. And many of us don't realize that actually these are all owned by the same company. So the fact that these big publishers are strategically taking over this infrastructure needs to be something that concerns us, because it really can further exclude already marginalized researchers and groups. So we not only need to look at who's doing the research work, but we have to also look at these structures and how academic knowledge is circulating. Who owns and makes decisions about these structures? Who's making a profit off of our knowledge? And I think this is the best way to answer the question of whether open science really can address structural knowledge inequality. It needs to start with us looking at the way that knowledge is circulating. Next slide. So against this commercialization of scholarly infrastructure, it really is time, I think, to discuss what we need to do to protect, catalyze, and further strengthen community-based knowledge repositories and systems. We wanted to bring you all together here because we can't do it alone. I don't know the answer. So I really hope that we can all think about exactly how the underlying systems that run Nairobi research need to interface and how we might better coordinate amongst our different sectors, our different disciplines, our different interests, in order to supplement and reinvest in a robust public research infrastructure. So again, when I say infrastructure, I'm not just talking about the technical side, but as well as the physical, but also the social connections and the social layers that facilitate how research is conducted. So I really hope the conversation today allows us to think more about what regenerative research processes might look like. So these are processes that don't extract, processes that restore, renew, revitalize communities' own knowledges and energy and materials. Next slide. So this is kind of the big context. I know we're talking at this big level of why we ended up focusing on research data today. The notion of data can be viewed from multiple perspectives, and I think you'll see from the way that we've divided the panels that all of them actually have some research data at the core there, but are coming from different lenses. So I've been conducting fieldwork in Nairobi since Jan this year, especially focused on commercial, nonprofit, and academic research organizations. I've been sitting with 3 different groups throughout the city doing a multi-sited ethnography. And one of the first things I quickly learned was that it was early to be talking and fostering conversations about sharing data across organizations. Initially, I was going to bring everyone together and we were going to start immediately talking about sharing data. But I realized that these organizations were not necessarily sharing data even within the organization with their team members. And this was surprisingly true both of well-resourced multinational company as well as a small startup. So it wasn't just a problem that one group was facing. So I began to seek out where existing public qualitative research data already existed. Where would a student go to begin their research project? Instead of setting up new infrastructure for such resources, what is it that prevents new data sets from feeding into existing public infrastructure? So this is what led me to start paying more attention to Nairobi's archives and libraries, and also what their current and potential role as data managers might be. Next slide. So as part of the fieldwork, I ended up doing a landscape analysis of libraries and archives in Nairobi, including accessibility and the content that they have. For example, I was surprised to find that in one library there was transcripts and field notes typed up from 1992. And so you can find more about, there was some really interesting stuff that ended up coming out. And so this is a QR code. You can use your phone and snap a shot that Trevor Sensiokawa and I worked on. And so this is a digital exhibit, but the physical exhibits, which are in that gallery space, also reflect some of the things that you can find online. Next slide. So Travis and I have also developed an ongoing cloud map through the Ushahidi software that pinpoints various research resources in the city. So our target audience is Kenyan university students just starting out on a research project who might not know where to go to begin. And so this map really isn't comprehensive, but the beauty of having a participatory mapping software is that anyone can suggest a pin. So I'm sure everyone in this audience has other sites that they would want to add. So if you go to the site there, you can just add it in, and as soon as the admin approves it, it's there. So please go ahead and suggest. We really invite you to collaborate on that. So finally, we conceptualize today's event, next slide, as being at the intersection of decolonial knowledge practices, open data, and digital archiving. The decolonial part is key because we talk of open as if open is always the best. But as the opening comments indicated, we need to also ask open to who and open for what. I haven't given up on open. Obviously, I'm still believe in the concept of openness, but I also recognize that the community and individuals' right to refuse to be researched or to be open should also be respected. And so we need to build in infrastructures and systems that also respect the right to be closed sometimes, and that openness all the time is not always the best. So different people on the panel will be speaking to the challenges of putting decolonial into practice, but I also invite you to be thinking throughout the day about how we can ensure that Kenya's research infrastructure closes the loop so that meaningful research gets back to those who are actually studied. We have an open task together to think about how to make scientific research less extroverted and instead supplement and regenerate what matters to the everyday lives of Kenyans. Thank you very much. And we'll be holding questions. Thanks. We'll hold questions. Please write them down on your one-pager because I think we hope that these will lend us into the first panel and the next panels. So I hope this has generated some discussion points in your head, but please write them down and then we'll use them into the panels. Hello?
Hi, I realized Angela jumped right into her presentation and we didn't introduce ourselves. So, or maybe you all know her, but you might not know me. I'm Yomida Mutuku, a researcher. I've been studying data in its various forms over the past 10 years. Angela alluded to the fact that since the early days of actually, almost 9 years ago, I've studied open data specifically in Kenya, and now my research interests have diversified and looking now at new technologies, looking at big data, looking at artificial intelligence. And in my presentation, I'll bring it all back to work on research data archiving. So Angela gave a definition, sorry, next slide. And the next slide. Angela gave a definition of what open data is, but I just wanted to situate it in our context here in Kenya specifically. And so, of course, as she mentioned, open data is freely accessible, used, modified and shared by anyone for any purpose. And usually the only thing, the only caveat that's put is that you attribute the person who first put out that data. And so as you can see, there's legal openness in that even if you were to find open data and use it for whatever you want to do, make money out of it, or just for your own personal hobbies, there's no legal restriction there. But at the same time, open data specifically also looks at technical openness, which means that any machine can basically read that data. So we are talking about your CSVs, your Excels, and debatably PDFs. So basically data that a machine can read and also analyze. So open data was coined first in 2003. So in the science field, it's relatively new. And the global movement itself really took off from 2008. So we are basically around 11 years into open data as a global movement. And the whole idea of thinking about open data stemmed from governments opening up government data. And the idea was that if you open up government data, then your government is more transparent and accountable to you. You can really question decisions they're making. And at the same time, that data can be reused by different ministries or different individuals in the private sector as well for innovation. So those early examples were, for instance, when the Transport for London, which operates the buses and the trains in London, opened up their data, and all of a sudden we had all these like fantastic apps where you could, see if you're going to get late or if you're going to miss your bus, and people made money from that. But at the same time, we also had, weather data being opened up, and that's what a lot of people in agriculture also using. But next slide. So that's on a global level. When we bring it back to Africa and Kenya, Kenya was actually a pioneer in this space. So if you think about, we've had the Kenya Bureau of Statistics for the longest time, we've had the Ministry of Planning, we've had Treasury, and a lot of the ministries deal with data. And so data is not a new concept when you think about government, and government data then has been in existence for quite a while. But in the 2000s, Kenya embarked on the digital government, digitizing its government processes, and I'm sure many of you interacted with the e-government initiatives at that point. Even just having a government website was fantastic, at that point, that you could find like where a ministry's office is. And so bringing it back to open data, Kenya was quite a pioneer in this space, led by the efforts of Professor Ndemo and other early actors. And so we launched our open data portal, which hosts a wide variety of government data that, again, based on the same definitions I had earlier mentioned, in 2011. And this was launched by Kibaki, and some of us in the room here were present at that launch. And so Kenya was the second country in Africa after Morocco to set up an open data portal. And at that point you could find budget data, education data, health data, agriculture data, and a lot of that data is still on the portal right now. Next slide, please. However, we have to realize that transparency did come naturally to Kenya, or to African governments for that matter. So we are coming from a situation where a lot of government information was held in secrecy. There was an infamous the Secrets Act, which a lot of, especially former British colonies had, where government data was a secret from the public, and so governments were very close to public scrutiny and not accountable to anyone but themselves. And so now you're here telling them, open up data, let people keep you to account, it will promote innovation. It's a hard sell. And so open data was actually seen a lot as a donor agenda, because a lot of those early efforts were funded by the likes of the World Bank, etc. So they're like, okay, fine, if you're giving us a grant or giving us money, we might consider, putting up this portal and putting up some data. And when you start thinking about it, you start wondering what then are the quality, what's the level of effort in maintaining that initiative? What's the value of the data sets that actually go up? Are those easy data sets you just pull from your desktop and put on your portal? Or is there a systematic way of opening up government data? And so a lot of MAPs were built by MAPs, M something, M other, based on open data. So you could find an app that helped you find your dispensaries. The question is, if you have lived somewhere for a long time, you probably know where your dispensaries are. So that data, that app may not necessarily be helpful to you. And so there's not a lot of scale or impact from these innovations, from this opening up data. And government says, so why should we continue opening up data if we can't see any impact from it? In fact, there's a story I wanted to say and I forgot earlier on. So in the open data circles, we know of a group of civil society actors in Uganda who went to the Ministry of Finance and asked for budget data to be opened up. And the minister was like, wait, but we are very open. We always have our budget data opened up. In fact, if you look at the newspaper from June, we published our budgets there. So, but you remember from our definitions of open data, that is not necessarily open data because unless you scan the newspaper or scan that report, you can't do much with that data when it's there. So the lack of scale of open data initiatives in Africa have really been attributed to lack of championship and political will from governments. And so maybe the transparency agenda was not the right narrative to push for open data in our context. And then comes 2015, when the new SDGs, or rather the SDGs were unveiled and became the global development agenda. And one of the big things that were agreed upon by member states was what is called the data revolution, or basically harnessing both traditional data, so statistics, etc., and new sources of data. For instance, how Angela is crowdsourcing from new data on where libraries are. Think about mobile phone data, satellite imagery, etc., to help achieve development goals. A lot of times we mainly relied on censuses, which happen every 10 years, or those statistically what's the word? Representative sampling, surveys to basically understand who, our communities, resource allocation, and where the gaps are. But when you start thinking about harnessing data and really putting it at the core of the development agenda, then we start shifting our mindsets around what can be done towards addressing SDGs. Next slide. So Kenya specifically has tried over the past few years to align, its development agenda from the medium-term plans to the long-term plans to Vision 2030 to SDGs. And we all know about the Big Four agenda. And so both private sector and public sector actors have been asking themselves, how can we use data to really achieve our development goals? How can we harness it? How can we apply it in our different contexts to accelerate how Kenya develops? And so, of course, here's an opportunity for this open data to achieve development goals. And now that's a stronger sell than say, oh, be transparent and let's keep you accountable. Because now you can show that if you use data, you can allocate your resources more efficiently, you can save money. And I know I'm talking in the context of quite a tough economy, but the hope is that, yes, data is being used for current policy planning. And so, as I mentioned earlier, as part of the data revolution, we have started looking at different types of open data. So we're not just relying on government ministries to open up data. These are screenshots from an analysis done on what is they're called the African Regional Data Cube, which is actually satellite data for the past 20 years that has been made open and has data on about 5 African countries, and Kenya is one of them. So before that, for a country like Kenya to access satellite data on its country, they had to spend close to $1 million a year. So now 19 years of this data is already free and available for reuse, again, the open data definition. And so in this example, you see you can start monitoring mining activities in Ghana. This is a project that's been done by the Ghanaian government. And there's also activities around studying deforestation in Kenya in the Mau region that have also been done using this data cube, which would have probably taken a lot of site visits to understand that phenomenon. So and of course, there's different use cases, for instance, of using mobile cell phone data to understand how diseases are spreading. So big data is becoming more open and again becoming accessible and being used for beyond just, for instance, what the original company that's generating the data intended to do with it. For instance, this data from ARDC is actually NASA data. It's data from a couple of satellites, Landsat and MODIS. And it's usually processed in a way that you don't have to really know how to deal with satellite data, but you can, if you can analyze data, you can use it. Next slide, please. So now, bringing back the conversation to, this space we are in, a library and open data, how do the two come together? So this last week, there's been quite a big storm on Twitter around, and this is dealing with Americans, and then I'll bring back to the Kenyan context, regarding the Apple's new credit card. So based on Apple's algorithms, people who have the same credit score have been finding that especially the women are being scored lower for this credit card. And one of the folks on Twitter was complaining that he and his wife have the same credit score in other banks, and they have, they pay their bills on time, have not defaulted on anything, but she only qualified for a $50, that's about 5,000 shillings, credit card limit, while he got 20 times more than her. So you wonder what data was used to score the wife for that, and then a lot of people jumped on and said it's exactly the same thing. So what Apple realized, or what came out from this Twitter storm, was that women were being discriminated against by this algorithm. And so you start wondering how would, we are using machines that are trying to scale how we analyze our context. Maybe there are really still room for qualitative data. How do you explain causality? How do you explain phenomena? And here's where research data, qualitative data plays in this space. And so then, if you're trying not to leave anyone behind, but not everyone is in the big data sets, then if you analyze that and use that to understand a whole population, you're missing out on critical people in society. So then, but then again, there's another issue, and Angela touched on it. I do want access to these services, but I also do want my data to be private to me. I just don't want anyone swooping in and swooping out and, using me to market goods. So in this era of big data, analytics, and AI, there's the big issue of privacy. Kenya just passed data protection law. Was it last week on Friday? That it was signed into law, and it spells out how companies will treat people's personal data. So now, going back to the example of the credit scoring, you want to get a loan from the bank, but the bank is obliged to share your data with the Credit Reference Bureau. But the law says you have the right to be forgotten. So if you defaulted on the loan, can you use the law and say, actually, I don't want my records out there that I defaulted on a loan. So there's all these different tensions coming in. You want service provision, but you want control of your data, and companies need to share your data to offer you services. What is the middle ground? And then now when you start talking about qualitative research data, when you think about transcripts, if any of you have done research, if you read through a transcript of a subject you interviewed, you can pretty remember who that subject was without even their name being there. You'll be like, oh yeah, this, because the information and the way they responded to those questions is very identifying to them. But at the same time, we're complaining that we're being over-researched because we have all these people coming into the country, or different researchers asking us questions. Why don't they share the data that was produced from a previous research? So again, the same tensions apply when you start opening up more qualitative data, which is very important to understand causality. So that really is the conversation we're trying to start today. We want to preserve our knowledge. A lot of knowledge being produced now is on digital formats. Maybe some of you have as many books as this library in your laptop or on the cloud, but and so that has to be considered differently than physical storage of books. And so in this era where we are new artifacts that regard our culture, our heritage, are on digital platforms, but need to be opened up, how do we start thinking about the infrastructure? Will they be stored in these libraries? Will they be stored in the archives, in the cloud? But then whose cloud is it? Who owns that space? Who owns that infrastructure? And so those are the questions that we've been asking ourselves, like coming from a more quantitative view of data and opening that up versus more qualitative view of data and opening that up. And so we are hoping that conversations might bring us closer to understanding how to start dealing with these new artifacts in this space. Because, for instance, the National Archives are supposed to hold records of all government records, for instance. But then, do they have a snapshot of a ministry's website from 2010? Because it will look very different from today. And if they have that snapshot, how do you access it? And what would you be looking for in that snapshot of that website? So I think really those are the conversations we hope to have today. And through the various panels, we'll touch on different aspects of infrastructure and privacy governance. And we do believe that it's not just limited to open data and research data, but more broadly, knowledge preservation. There's a slide, the last slide really. Sorry, what's the next one? There's been an ongoing series of conferences for the past 10 years called the International Open Data Conference, which ideally this is where these conversations take place. And most of them have been in the global north. So for the past, I think, until last year, they were held biannually in Washington, DC, in Toronto, in Madrid. And then last year it went to Buenos Aires, which was the first time it was coming to the global south. And then Kenya won the bid to host this Open Data Conference next year. And so while we're very excited about hosting Open Data in Kenya, the International Open Data Conferences in Kenya is typically, many of you might have been invited to travel abroad for conferences, and if it's not sponsored, you can't attend it. And so we hope by it being locally, we have more representation from not just the global south, but from African participants and talking about an African agenda. And the theme of the IODC, next slide, 2020 is actually bridging data communities for sustainable development. So we are trying to figure out, okay, again, dealing with open data, and it's not just government data, it's private data that's being opened up. We are trying to create these new partnerships called collaboratives. What governs those relationships between us researchers and Safaricom and the government of Kenya without infringing on your rights? So a lot of those conversations will be taking place in LDC, and in the run-up to LDC, there's events such as ours that start the agenda setting, and a lot of the conversation from here could inform as well, that final program towards LDC. So look out for it. Probably it will be KCC, and it probably will be as disruptive as the current conference that's going on right now, because it's quite a big deal in the data community, and it will be a combination of major events, because next year is SDG +5, next year is the Beijing conference +25. So there's a lot of big activities that are now, and big different data communities that will be coming together to talk about how data is affecting their different practices. And I hope the research data community here and other whatever communities or practices of data you deal with will also join us at LDC. And if we have time later, maybe I'll invite one of the conveners to talk more about it. Yeah, thank you.